Good morning, good morning. All right, let's dive into the meat of this book. Chapter 1 of Prophecy, Key to the Future, is War to be Poured Out Upon All Nations. Great subject. All right, the beginning of war in the last days. On December 25th, 1832, Christmas Day, Joseph Smith uttered a prophecy concerning the wars that will shortly come to pass, beginning at the rebellion of South Carolina. See Doctrine and Covenants 87:1. It was 28 years later, on April 12th, 1861, that his prophecy began to be fulfilled. On that day, Southern troops opened fire at the Union fort at Charleston, South Carolina. This statement, which has come to be known today as the Prophecy on War, described other details of the war between the states also. It stated that the southern states shall be divided against the northern states. Again, Doctrine and Covenants 87:3. And held that the southern states would call on other nations, even as the nation of Great Britain, for assistance. America's history, however, readily affirms that this war was between the northern and southern states as early as May 1861. The Southern Confederacy sent commissioners abroad to Great Britain, France, Holland, and Belgium to seek recognition and aid from foreign powers. The prophecy was even more far-reaching than the prediction of the war between the states. Its assertion that the time would come when Great Britain would call upon other nations in order to protect itself from still other nations extended the prophecy down to the time of the First and Second World Wars. Just some footnotes here. Doctrine and Covenants 87:3. 11 years later, he stated that once again the commencement of the difficulties which caused much bloodshed previous to the coming of the Son of Man will be in South Carolina, and it may probably arise through the slave question. That's DNC 130, 12 through 13. And then for the First and Second World Wars, this was clearly Charles A. Collis's interpretation of the matter, said he during the conference address while telling of a conversation he had with a minister. Joseph Smith, the prophet of God, foretold the great Civil War. He likewise predicted by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost that the World War would come to vex the nations. So that is CR April 1923. So there you go. In these wars, England formed alliances with France, Russia, the United States, and other nations in order to repel the Nazis or Central Powers. The prophecy on war stated that the time will come that war will be poured out upon all nations, beginning at this place, South Carolina, DNC 87, verse 2. England calling for assistance, however, played an important chronological part of the prophetic timetable given to Joseph Smith, for the revelation stated that when England calls on other nations for assistance, then war shall be poured out upon all nations. Thus it is that wars were to begin in the last days, with the rebellion of South Carolina, but the sign of their reaching worldwide proportions was to be England's appeal for help in the world wars. According to the prophecy, wars among the nations are to continue with devastating effect, for thus with the sword and by bloodshed the inhabitants of the earth shall mourn, and shall be made to feel the wrath and indignation and chastening hand of the Almighty God, until the consumption decreed hath made a full end of all nations. The message of Joseph Smith's prophecy on war, then, is that God has allowed a series of wars to be poured out upon the earth. These wars, beginning with the war between the states in 1861, were to gain worldwide proportions at the time when England would seek alliances with other nations, World Wars I and II. The wars were to continue until the consumption decreed by God was made full, and was decreed by God has made a full end of all nations. We find ourselves today in the midst of a series of wars. We know many of the wars which have already served to fulfill Joseph Smith's utterance. Those who accept the prophecy as a revelation from God are committed to the belief that such wars will continue until the present nations of the earth are consumed. There is a footnote in here where it says, Bishop Joseph L. Worthlin, during the General Conference October 1858, took for his subject the prophecy on war. He chronicled the wars which have already taken place following the manner the prophet Joseph gave us this marvelous revelation in 1832. Civil War came in 1861. The war between Denmark and Prussia, 1864, Italy and Austria, 1865, and 1866, Austria and Prussia in 1866, Russia and Turkey, 1877, China and Japan, 1894, 1895, Spanish-American War in 1898, Japan and Russia, 1904 and 1905, World War I in 1914 to 18. Then the next war was a comparatively small one, Ethiopia and Italy, when the people in that land of Ethiopia were taken over and controlled by Italy. I'm grateful to the Lord that they now have their freedom. Then the World War passed, and of course the Korean War, October 1858. So that's the footnote about it. So you can see that he's talking, they were chronicling all these wars that were coming to pass. Slaves are to rise up against their masters. After telling how war will be poured out upon all nations at the time England seeks aid from foreign powers, the prophecy on war adds another item in this chronology of the future. It says, "And it shall come to pass after many days, slaves shall rise up against their masters, who shall be marshaled and disciplined for war." This prophecy has often been taken as a reference only to the Negroes in the United States. Some Latter-day Saints, however, recognize in the prophecy a much broader meaning, said Bishop Joseph L. Worthlin, while commenting on this phrase of it in 1958. In many cases, I'm quite sure we all think this has to do particularly with the slaves in the southern states. But I believe, brethren and sisters, that it was intended that this referred to slaves all over the world. And I think of those particularly in the land of Russia and other countries wherein they have been taken over by that great nation, and where the people are actually the slaves of the individuals who guide and direct the affairs of Russia and China, and where the rights and the privilege to worship God and to come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ and his Son is denied them. During the past few years, the world has witnessed a continuing series of rebellions, uprisings, and stormy negotiations of people who have sought to throw off what they consider to be oppression and tyrannical rule. France, England, Portugal, and Belgium have all seen the deterioration of their colonies and have released many of their subjects to form new and independent governments. Latin America, Africa, and the Near East, these areas have seen continual difficulties as their oppressed peoples have been fought to throw off their political and economic rulers. Within the United States, we are also witnessing a continual struggle for race equality, as the Negroes and other racial groups strive to rise socially, culturally, economically. These tensions throughout the world would seem to indicate that we have entered into the period Joseph Smith prophesied, and would follow the first spreading of wars to all nations, when slaves shall rise up against their masters, who shall be marshaled and disciplined for war. So remember, this book was written in 1962 to start. Yeah. And so this was right during the civil rights movement. The purpose of wars is to prepare for the preaching of the gospel. Since the prophecy on war was given, war has, to some degree, been regarded by some Latter-day Saints as having the function as an instrument for the overthrow of rulers and governments which would not allow the gospel to be preached by Latter-day Saint missionaries. This was Orson Pratt's teaching in 1875. At the present time, there are some nations who will not permit any religion to be proclaimed within their borders except that which is established by law. When God shall cast down thrones, which he will soon do, when he shall overturn kingdoms and empires, which time is very near at hand, then other governments will be formed more favorable to religious liberty, and the missionaries of this church will visit those nations. And so we might enumerate what God is doing among these despotic powers, overturning and changing long-established usages and institutions, that his servants may go by his own command to deliver the great and last message of the gospel to the inhabitants of the earth, preparatory to the coming of his Son. Journal of Discourses 18. On another occasion, he stated, again, Orson Pratt, that, quote, "The day will come when the nations of Europe will have warred among themselves sufficiently long, and those despot governments are torn down, and when the hand of oppression and tyranny has been eased up, and when the principles of religious liberty have become more fully and more widely spread, that the elders of this church will traverse all these nations, and then we shall have use for these 70s that have been organizing so long." Unquote. Parley P. Pratt also applied this philosophy that the purpose of war is to prepare the unreceptive nations to receive the gospel. He carried the application beyond the Gentile nations to the Oriental nation of Japan, and said that politically speaking, some barriers yet remain to be removed, and some conquests to be achieved, such as the subjugation of Japan and the triumph of the constitutional liberty among certain nations where mind and thought and religion are still prescribed by law. That comes from Parley P. Pratt's Key to the Science of Theology. He continued by stating that the subjugation of Japan was to take place before the gathering of the tribes of Israel to Palestine. Elder Harold B. Lee, in October 1854 General Conference of the Church, quoted the above statement and commented, quote, "Subjugation means conquering by force. I want to say to you that one of the most significant things that I have seen in the Far East is the fulfillment of what Elder Parley P. Pratt testified would be one of the significant developments necessary to the consummation of God's purposes, the subjugation of Japan and the triumph of constitutional liberty among the certain nations, where mind and thought and religion are still prescribed by law." He then elaborated on how World War II has opened up the way for effective missionary work in that nation. So, here's what I find interesting is, yes, this is one of those prophecies that I've commented on in my first introduction reading to this, that I'm like, yeah, this stuff has been bandied about, I wonder where it came from. This is definitely one of them. I have always kind of heard that, in reference to Doctrine and Covenants 87 and such, that the wars would help permit preaching. And funny enough, it's true. Think about it. Here they're talking about Japan, and that's true. And I remember when I was a young kid that we were like, oh yeah, being able to teach in Russia, ha ha ha, yeah, like that'll ever happen. You know, or man, we really have to wait until something changes. And so, you know, I was, my formative childhood years were in the 90s. By the time that it was a little after the year 2000, there were missions and missionaries in Russia. And it was a quiet thing, but it happened. I mean, Jonah Barnes, the author of Key to the Keystone and Lost Gems of Genesis, which I love so much, he went on his mission in Russia. And, you know, as a kid growing up in the 90s, it was kind of like, huh. You know, at first it was like, yeah, well, you know, we'll see. And then later on it was like, no, I think it'll happen. And then it did happen, and I just didn't even notice. And then I started hearing about people who haven't been called to Russia and Siberia and stuff. And it's like, wow. There's obviously huge amounts of growth in the church in Africa. There's talk about being able to teach in China. And the funny thing is that's happened in a weird way. We'll see. There might be more to come later on, because technically we had plenty of missionaries in Hong Kong, which was not part of China for a long time. And we even have a temple there in Hong Kong. And so when England decided to hand over Hong Kong back to China, despite all the misgivings about it politically, which are coming to fruition, of them knuckling under Hong Kong to be just like mainland China, there at least is people who are members of the church still in Hong Kong, and that temple is still working. And it's my hope that it will be a seed to the rest of China eventually. I don't know how that's going to look. There's other places, especially that have despots and warlords, that it's going to be like, well, how are we going to get to these people? Like our Muslim brothers and sisters who they have a form of truth, but obviously there's pretty far off. Like there's things in Japan and China and these culturally very different places that don't have that basis in Christianity that need to be opened up, and more, I would hope, but we'll see. So in a funny way, this is really cool, but this really is like, hey, we're already seeing the fruits of all these prophecies. So this one, I'm like, okay. So when you hear people talk about the gospel wars and commencements of not just wars, but just the progression of the gospel in all these places, you can see that being fulfilled from these things. All right, next section. 2 periods of war: preparatory wars and wars of complete destruction. According to Joseph Smith's prophecy on war, wars are to be poured out until a full end to all nations have been made. That's an interesting one. For those of you who really like tinfoil hattery stuff, and like Illuminati confirmed kind of things, the World Economic Forum and other really big business people and such continue to seem to push really strongly certain things that people take to be that they're trying to or have a united global government, where, for example, the European Union was a trial run of that in a way. But in the end, if you really want to put on the tinfoil hat, you can go for it. That it might be a way that things like that happen, or at least if it undergirds the movement or the push for things among global elites. And the problem is I don't know too much about it. I really don't. And so I know enough to know that it's really bothersome. There are people who are rich and powerful and trying to push certain agendas that you just sit there and scratch your head and go, why in the world do you even think that this is a good idea? And yet you see that being pushed in different places. It's kind of fascinating. So, ending all nations, having a global government. And I always worry about who's in control of that global government, because frankly, there are times where I'm like, stuff that they push, I'm not so keen on. But, so that's one way. The other way is that you have utter destruction to the point that there's just no use to have nations. There's a wonderful book that I read when I was 19 called Alas, Babylon. And it is about nuclear war. And you basically have a very brief lead up to when the war happens, and then it's surviving after the war. And it's really kind of cool. It's really amazing. But what's really very interesting is near the very end of the book, a helicopter, which had not been seen for several years after the bombs drop, stops by this little town where the book take place. And they ask who won the war. And they say, well, the U.S. did. And then it ends on kind of a grim note that, they turn back to their 5,000 years in the past after that. Their way of living 5,000 years in the past, when the helicopter rides away. And you're just like, yeah, and the point? So, really fantastic book. Highly recommend. But, So it makes me wonder about that. Anyway, so let's continue on with what the author has to say. But it appears that the characteristics of the early era, as was discussed in the preceding section, the purpose of a portion of this warfare is to allow the gospel to enter into areas where it has been prohibited in the past. This apparently is the characteristic of only the early period of warfare, or the period of preparatory wars. It appears that a characteristic of this early period of warfare has been and will continue to be that the converts in these newly proselytized nations will be persecuted by the people of those nations. Orson Pratt taught in 1859 that after the missionaries had penetrated into these nations, they, quote, have got to do a great deal of preaching before the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. They have got to go and build up the church of the Lamb of God among those nations, and set ministers over them, and go and build up more, that when the multitudes gather to fight against them, they may be armed with the power that comes from heaven. Journal of Discourses. While speaking of the future missionary efforts in Europe, Pratt said that after the church is established in Europe, quote, the unconverted people who have witnessed the activities of the missionaries, are to get together in multitudes like other nations to fight against it, and so they will in Austria, Spain, Portugal, and in all modern nations of Europe, as well as those nations that inhabit Asia and Africa. Journal of Discourses again. According to Elder Pratt, it will also be characteristic of the period of preparatory wars that the converts made in foreign countries will be advised to remain in their home areas. They will not, as it seems, to be called to leave their homes and gather to the American Zion, even though they will have to endure hardships and persecution. This is the present policy of the church, as is evidenced by the building of temples and formation of stakes on foreign soil during the past decade. Pratt spoke of the unwise prayers of American saints, that the European converts would soon be gathered to America, and commented, quote, when the time comes that the saints of the Lamb of God are scattered upon all the face of the earth among all nations and kingdoms of the Gentiles, and that the multitudes gather against them to battles, we shall not find such unwise prayers answered. The saints, instead of being all gathered out, will still be among all the nations. For the power of the Lamb of God to descend upon the saints of the Most High, that are among all the nations and kindred kingdoms of the Gentiles, and are not only upon these, but also upon his covenant people, then descendants of Jacob, and they are to be armed with righteousness and the power of God in great glory. But gather them all out, and where have you got your saints? It would completely falsify this saying. Unquote. Elder Levi, so this is an interesting thing, because in some ways, you might be seeing this right now. The reason I put it in that terms is because we are seeing there's quite a bit of fighting against Christians in general in certain places. And you'll see news articles about that depending on your local source of news. And so even though, like, how this book is written is it's focusing on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I get that. At the same time, there's plenty of people who are Christian whom God also loves, and they are trying to follow him with all their might. So I deposit the idea that perhaps it might also include other Christian brothers and sisters that are being persecuted. But at the same time, I also understand that, you know, what is it going to take for people to turn against us as the Church of Jesus Christ in latter days? And that's an interesting thought, because obviously they did it before, and the question was why. And at first, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, it was because of ideology, frankly, especially early persecution, even before the later years in Nauvoo, before polygamy even happened, before they even had like an excuse that they could point to. They just called Joseph Smith a liar and a fraud, and that he was evil, or they just didn't like him before they could blame it on something. And frankly, that's still the default position. It's that people who fight against the church, they may focus on certain things, but in the end, it comes down to that they don't like them. For a majority of it, that's kind of all there is to it. Now, in the end, so what would turn people nowadays, though? We've become so open-minded culturally in the United States for so many different things. It's like, why would people come to literally fight against the church? Come to fisticuffs against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints only? Something tells me that it may not be only. I'm wondering if, think if you have some sort of global or world established government, and whoever's at the reins of that, by whatever means, decides that all religion should be stamped out like it was in China or Russia, and they start pushing that, that would be a very easy way, because then those who are in charge, who have that monopoly on violence, mostly, would definitely be fighting. Could that be a way? Maybe. I have no clue. But I wouldn't be surprised if that is a method. But let's hear what actually other people have to say about it. It's just one of those puzzling things where I'm trying to understand, like, why is it that the world, with or without governments, would turn against Christianity, or specifically the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? That's what's interesting, because in these places that are just slaughtering Christians, it's ideology. It's a major religion decides that it's perfectly fine to, by the sword, kill Christians, especially in countries that have strongly different religious things, whether that's in Arabic and Muslim type nations. Well, in China that still happens. There's huge crackdowns on that. And this is politically charged stuff, and not very PC, but just look around. You can kind of see it, but it doesn't sound as critical as this is, so we'll see where it grows. All right. Elder Levi Edgar Young taught that these wars and persecutions will be for the ultimate benefit of the saints. This is a day of sore trial for all the inhabitants of the earth. Nations tottering and governments are in danger of being overthrown. Hardly a day passes but what we hear of some terrible catastrophe or some awful tribulation that has come to the children of men. Darkness covers the earth, and gross darkness the people. We are being disciplined, and when we come to know the wisdom of this, we will look upon the whole of life as a means of sanctification. I sincerely believe that these days are bringing us closer and closer to God." Unquote. But after the missionaries have penetrated into all these nations, and the persecution has risen against the converts who are now there, it has been held by the church leaders that the type of warfare which will be waged throughout the earth will eventually change. No longer will war serve the purpose of preparing the nations to hear the gospel, but it will become an instrument of terrible destruction and annihilation. Orson Pratt contrasted these two types of wars. Quote, "This war that is now taking place, war between Austria and the Allied powers of France and Sardinia, will not result in that dreadful extinction that is foretold in the Book of Mormon, which will rage among all nations and kingdoms of the Gentiles, or in other words, among the nations of the Christendom. The one is a war preparatory to the proclamation of the gospel. The other is a war of terrible destruction, which will not better the condition of those who escape." Journal of Discourses. This is the one where people are like, we need to prepare for it. And I agree, but at the same time, we're being taught that we need to listen to the Spirit of God to prepare for these last days. And I tend to agree. I think we need to prepare both physically, but also spiritually for what's to come. Because, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what they have to say. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are like really worried about it, but at the same time, there's a lot of peace about the whole thing that I feel about it or that's been talked about in conference. So it appears that the line of demarcation between these two periods and types of warfare will be the fulfilling of the times of the times of the Gentiles. Footnote to that. Well, let me finish the sentence. When the Spirit of the Lord will entirely withdraw from the Gentile nations. For he said, and he's about to go into a quote, but the footnote says, the next chapter will explain this term fully. Briefly, the times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled when the LDS missionaries will be called out of the Gentile or Christian nations. This will be because of the unreceptive attitude and great wickedness which will characterize the Gentile people at that time. This event will be the beginning of the great calamities throughout the world and terrible internal war within the United States. Okay. So the quote he was getting to, quote, by and by, when the Lord has made bare his arm in signs and great wonders and in mighty deeds throughout the instrumentality of his servants, the 70s, which we have a lot of now, and through the instrumentality of the churches that shall be built up, and the nations and kingdoms of the earth have been faithfully and fully warned, the Lord has fulfilled and accomplished all things that have been written in the Book of Mormon, and in all other revelations pertaining to the preaching of the gospel, and to the nations of the Gentiles, and to the nations of Israel. By and by, the Spirit of God will entirely withdraw from those Gentile nations and leave them to themselves. Then they will find something else to do besides warring against the saints in their midst, besides raising their sword and fighting against the Lamb of God. For then war will commence in earnest, and such a war as probably never entered into the hearts of men in our age to conceive of. No nation of the Gentiles upon the face of the whole earth, but what will be engaged in deadly war, except the latter-day kingdom. They will be fighting one against another. Again, that came from Journal of Discourses. Now, what's really funny is I contrast these like really dark and dire prophecies by, what was this? This is one of the Pratts. Orson Pratt. I think they're relying a lot on Orson Pratt in this book too. There are prophecies. There was one in Doctrine and Covenants that I read that as the war is poured out among all nations, that if basically you need to come to Zion, if you did not want to raise your sword against your brother, that you just, okay, you don't want to fight, got to go to Zion. And the great and terrible people of Zion would protect you. Which, again, this is all very fascinating to me because I sit here and go, how in the world, they talk about stuff happening miraculously, which will be really cool if that's truly how it's going to be fulfilled. But I've also seen that miraculous is still miraculous, even when it's unlikely, but it has like, oh, that's what you mean kind of stuff. For example, I really need to look this up, so maybe I will in extra credit shorts or whatever else, of the prophecy in Doctrine and Covenants saying that if you don't want to raise up your hand against your neighbor, you got to come to Zion. And okay, if that's true, if we don't have to raise our sword, but yet we're protected, how does that work out when everyone's fighting against each other? I tend to think of us Latter-day Saints as a lot of us are along the lines of, we're not really great fighters, but there are plenty of others who are like, yeah, let's deck ourselves out in all this gear and be ready for the second coming. And so I'm like, is it going to be a contingent of like, because we're all not uniform. We're not, as the body of Christ, some are warrior arms and legion legs, and others are just like the soft belly that are just like, we love people and we don't want to fight. So we are not all of the same caliber when it comes to that. So it makes me wonder if that will end up being a salvation of the saints, or if it's something entirely different. Again, this is the stuff I've heard. This is the things that I'm seeing. So again, the biggest thing is like, despite all these calamities being talked about, just listen to the Spirit of God, and He will guide you what you need to do. That is more important. Like, all this can be a warning, the signs of the times, the sing of the fig leaves, as we talked about in the allegory from the New Testament. But the most important thing for you is that you need to pray and receive revelation and ask God, hey, if you have worries in your hearts about this, receive comfort, receive blessing, and receive instruction from the one who knows most. All right, because he'll answer. There we are. At the time of the second stage of warfare, which could be termed warfare of complete destruction, the majority of the righteous saints will not remain among the Gentile nations, but shall be gathered unto it, Zion, out of every nation under heaven. The footnote for this is, the reader should note that the translation made by Joseph Smith, which is known as the Joseph Smith chapter in the Pearl of Great Price, has served to give chronological sequence to Christ's statements found in Matthew 24. In the biblical chapter, the chronology is indistinguishable, but it becomes evident in the Pearl of Great Price rendition. This chapter talks about two periods of time. The first portion is the prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem, which was fulfilled in 1900 years ago. The second portion deals with the events which precede Christ's second coming. In his prophecy, the Savior compares the events of the two periods, verse 21 from the Pearl of Great Price, and the translation verse between the past and the present. Behold, these things I have spoken unto you concerning the Jews, again after the tribulation of those days which shall come upon Jerusalem. So that footnote was about people starting to be gathered to Zion. And when he's talking about Joseph Smith, I think he's talking about Joseph Smith translation. Because like he said, he says it's in the Pearl of Great Price. We've kind of incorporated it into like Bible dictionary type indexes and such. But it's Matthew chapter 24, or at least maybe it is Joseph Smith history where it quotes that, but we'll see. A careful analysis of Christ's explanation in the Pearl of Great Price of the events which are to happen in the last days will show that he recognized these two periods of warfare, differentiated between them. After telling his disciples of the impending destruction of Jerusalem, which took place in 70 AD, he began to explain the events which will precede his second coming. He told of false Christs and false prophets who would arise to deceive the very elect, and then told the period of preparatory wars. He's about to do a quote, but I wanted to comment on that. I'm wondering how these false Christs will appear, because most of the time, most people do not take them seriously. Like, I know that there is literally someone calling himself Jesus Christ, like over in Russia. And he does have a following over there. But I'm wondering if it's more a symbolic type. Because I don't see people claiming to be Jesus Christ, because we all sit here and think, dude, he's going to come to the Mount of Olives, he's going to be like all this big, miraculous, powerful, glorious stuff. So, when you talk about false Christ, I'm wondering if it's a type of person who is in charge, exercising authority, or trying to lead people away spiritually. But anyway, now for the quote. Behold, I speak these things unto you for the elect's sake, and you also shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. See what I mean? For all I have told you must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Oh, I think that's the Doctrine and Covenants quote. Sorry. The footnote at the end of that quote was talking about, the big one that I read was about Joseph Smith. But the other one that I missed was Doctrine and Covenants 45. Let me go to that real quick, because I think that's the one that I'm talking about, where everyone has to be gathered and such. So, no, don't need Luke. I need to go back to Doctrine and Covenants, chapter 45, verse 69. Scroll, baby, scroll. 69. Okay, yeah, here we are. You hear of wars in foreign lands. You are even at the doors, many are here hence. Gathered in the eastern lands. Go forth to western countries. One heart and mind, purchase the inheritance. That's 66. New Jerusalem. Oh, let me just read this whole section. This is what I'm talking about here from Doctrine and Covenants. And it shall be called New Jerusalem, a land of peace, a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints of the Most High God. And the glory of the Lord shall be there, and the terror of the Lord shall be there, insomuch that the wicked will not come unto it. And it shall be called Zion. And it shall come to pass among the wicked that every man will not take his sword against his neighbor, must needs flee to Zion for their safety. And these shall be gathered unto it out of every nation under heaven. And it shall be the only people that shall not be at war with one another. And it shall be said among the wicked, let us not go up to battle against Zion, for the inhabitants of Zion are terrible, wherefore we cannot stand. And it shall come to pass that all the righteous shall be gathered out from all nations, and shall come to Zion, singing with songs of everlasting joy. This is the exact chapter I was talking about. And I read that in the Doctrine and Covenants, and I see that that's, coupled with New Jerusalem, the Missouri area, and I'm like, the wicked don't want to come to it. They don't want to fight against it. We're considered a terrible people. I just wonder how that's going to happen. So maybe there's enough written in here that it'll help try and explain it. And we'll see how it actually comes to fruition. Because again, when it comes to these, sometimes it fulfills itself in ways that you don't expect, but other ways it's exactly how you expect. Because frankly, some of this is exactly, well, when you look back at it, it's fulfilled. All right. He warned that during the period of false reports, his coming would be given, and cautioned them that such reports should not be accepted. He said that when he did come, his coming would be visible to all the earth. After this warning, he began to speak of the second era of wars, the wars of complete destruction. His statement details the characteristics of this latter period. He foretold the calling of the members out of the nations of the earth to Zion. Mine elect shall be gathered from the four quarters of the earth. Footnote. Anyways, the Savior, in prophesying of the second period of wars, also foretold the plagues and the destruction, which are to be poured out when the times of the Gentiles will have been fulfilled, which are to be a characteristic of the period of wars of complete destruction. Quote, Behold, I speak for mine elect's sake, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. The great wickedness which will have brought about the withdrawal of the missionaries and the members of the lands of the Gentiles is mentioned. For the Lord said that because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. You see that now too. But you could say that at almost any time. I'm going to be frank on that one. But there is a footnote to that says, the Savior's prophecy continues from this point, giving a chronology of the events which will transpire until final coming in glory. He foretells the preaching of the gospel after the Great World War. He alludes to two events of the Battle of Armageddon, the abomination of desolation, or desecrating of the temple at Jerusalem, the darkening of the heavens, which will be seen as a result of the earthquake at the time of his second coming on Mount Olives, in verses 32 through 35. Then he tells of the appearance of the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, and finally his coming in glory with the hosts of heaven. See verses 36 and 37. So, we are. See, that's the funny thing is there's all sorts of, oh my gosh, there's so much that's going to happen. But I always sit there and think of Doctrine and Covenants 45 and just go to verse 60. So Doctrine and Covenants 45, verse 60. That's the one you got to remember. Anyways, the great wickedness which will have brought about the withdrawal of missionaries and the members. So this is why I see a bunch of, there's a few YouTube channels on YouTube that focus a lot on the second coming's coming and people talking about missionaries are going to be withdrawed in 2027 and things like that. And I'm like, I guess we'll see. Again, I'm starting to understand where they're getting these ideas. And although they seem somewhat far-fetched for having an exact time, I'm like, okay. We'll see, 2020, like literally I saw someone talking about, it'll be 2027. And they were talking so deeply in this culture of future prophecy and preparation and other things like that, that it was a disconnect from me in my everyday life. And because of that, I'm like, I'm inclined to go, okay, we'll put a tinfoil hat on that and come back later. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So, in the same way, I want you to approach this that I'm reading. It's like, great, learn these signs, but if people are trying to put a specific date on it, keep it in the back of your head. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And go on with your life. Life continues. You'll see when things happen. To me, that's the point, is that if you learn all this, don't let it give you anxiety. Go to the Almighty, see how it's going to impact your life, and more importantly, just let it be signposts. Not anxiety, just signposts. All right. Nephi also contrasted these two eras of warfare as he expounded the prophecies of Isaiah. He referred to the area of preparatory war as the period when the Lord God will proceed to make bare his arm in the eyes of all the nations, in bringing about his covenants and his gospel unto those who are of the house of Israel. This period of preaching, as he foresaw, will be marked by nations who will fight against Israel and will persecute the church. That's 1 Nephi 22 is the chapter you're looking for these. Then he referred to the second stage of warfare, or period of complete destruction, in which the house of Israel will be gathered out of captivity, and the nations who warred against the saints shall war among themselves, and the sword of their own hands shall fall upon their own heads, and they shall be drunken with their own blood. Again, all in 1 Nephi chapter 22. They shall be turned one against another, and they shall fall into the pit which they digged to ensnare the people of the Lord. All those who have fought against Zion shall be destroyed. If you don't mind, I'll try to be quick. It'll be a little bit longer, but we can do this. The United States warned of conflict during the, let me see. Yeah, you know what? Let's push through. Sorry, I'm just so excited. The United States warned of conflict during the period of preparatory wars, Third World War. Several prophecies have been recorded as having been uttered by the prophet Joseph Smith, which deal with a future war of worldwide dimensions. This war, according to the evidence to be cited, will fall during the period of preparatory wars, before the fulfilling of the times of the Gentiles, before the period of warfare of total destruction. So the war will fall during the period of preparatory wars, before the fulfilling times of the Gentiles, before the war of total destruction. Okay. Mosiah Hancock, so he's talking about world wars. Mosiah Hancock, son of a close friend and bodyguard of Joseph Smith, recorded an important prophecy as having been made by the prophet. According to his diary, this prophecy was made the day after Joseph made his final speech to the Nauvoo Legion, Wednesday, June 19th, 1844, 8 days before his martyrdom. After telling how the prophet discussed a map of the West and foretold the route the saints would follow in their western exodus, Hancock records that Joseph Smith's statements to him that, quote, there will be two great political parties in this country. One will be called the Republican, the other the Democrat Party. Nailed that. These two parties will go to war, and out of these two parties will spring another party, which will be the Independent American Party. The United States will spend her strength and means warring in foreign lands until other nations will say, let us divide up the lands of the United States. Then the people of the United States will unite and swear by the blood of their forefathers that the land shall not be divided. Then the country will go to war, and they will fight until one half of the U.S. Army will give up, and the rest will continue to struggle. They will keep on until they are very ragged and discouraged and almost ready to give up, when the boys from the mountains will rush forth in time to save the American army from defeat and ruin. They will say, brethren, we are glad you have come. Give us men henceforth who can talk with God. Then you will have friends, but you will save the country when its liberty hangs by a hair, as it were. Oh! I'm wondering if this is Mosiah Lyman Hancock, Life and Story of Mosiah Lyman Hancock. That's the reference where they got this. A typewritten copy of the original manuscript is available in the Brigham Young University Library. Well, This is a much more detailed prophecy than I've ever heard of before about, they talk about the Constitution hanging by a thread, and they have that in here, so I'm sure we'll get to it, but, I mean, to me, wow, that's, we are not quite at this type of prophecy, but if this really starts to come true, where it's like, oh, we're going to spend our strength in other wars, okay, I can see it. I mean, we're gearing up for it pretty darn quick in all sorts of ways, whether it's trying to push us to, let's say we take, we've already toppled the ruler of Venezuela. We haven't done much otherwise. We have taken out a lot of key personnel in Iran and are trucking back that way to help those who are fighting the slaughter that's happening over there. We've got us pushing for Greenland, but in a mostly peaceful way, although people love to say, oh, we're going to fight for it. It's like, really? To me, all this is positioning for if there are fights against specifically Russia and China, and because they've been saber rattling for quite some time. And so if they finally sit there and say, well, we got to do something, I don't know. I really don't know. There's stuff that we prepare for like that, and it's like, yeah, okay, so we expend our strength going and doing other people's wars, and then they'll be like, oh, U.S. is weak, let's go divide it. We'll see when that happens. I had a dream one night about something like that, but it's very not specific. And not specific to this topic, but anyway. In the light of recent events, it appears that the powers which will attack the United States after this nation has expended its strength in foreign wars will be the communist powers under the leadership of Russia, which seems really weird to me with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, because it's like they're expending so much on that war, and no one's really gaining anything other than a meat grinder for the youth. It's just horrific. Just horrific. But, you know, again, this was originally written in 1962. That made a lot more sense then. It'll be the communist powers under the leadership of Russia. In a conference address delivered on 7th of October 1961, Elder Ezra Taft Benson spoke on the dangers of communism and warned of the great danger to the United States, which that force poses. He spoke of a communist attempt to overthrow the United States Constitution and spoke of a prophecy similar to the above prophecy, which was recorded by Mosiah Hancock. And he's about to get into the quote of Ezra Taft Benson speaking about something like Mosiah Hancock. Again, at this point, I would see China as more of someone who would do something like that. And they are definitely still communists, so. But, again, we'll see. Maybe it is still both. Concerning the United States, the Lord revealed to his prophets that the greatest threat would be a vast worldwide secret combination. Yep. Which would not only threaten the United States, but seek to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. In connection with the attack on the United States, the Lord told his prophet that there would be an attempt to overthrow the country by destroying the Constitution. We're just already seeing that by the erosion of it, especially over the past couple of decades. But that's been happening for a long while, not just recently, but it's been eroding for a long time. Like, just go and read Skousen's 5,000-Year Leap, and also read Bastiat's The Law, which is literally just about capitalism. It's a tiny book. It was meant to be a pamphlet, and back in the day, pamphlets were big. And so it's a tiny book, but a large pamphlet compared to nowadays. And you just sit there and go, wow, have we gone so far from the principles of the founding of the country? So anyways, so by destroying the Constitution, Joseph Smith predicted that the time would come when the Constitution would hang, as it were, by a thread. So everyone seems to be quoting Ezra Taft Benson when talking about the hanging by a thread, but that seems to have come from Mosiah Lyman Hancock and talking about, you know, they'll be trying to invade the United States, and half of the army will have given up. But let's continue on. And that at that time this people will step forth to save it from the threatened destruction. It is my conviction that the elders of Israel, widely spread over the nation, will at that crucial time successfully rally the righteous of our country and provide the necessary balance of strength to save the institutions of constitutional government. Pardon me. The prophets in our day have continually warned us of these internal threats, that our greatest threat from socialistic communism lies within our country. As the first presidency pointed out in a statement signed in 1936, if we continue to uphold communism by not making it treasonable, our land shall be destroyed. For the Lord has said that whatsoever nation shall uphold such secret combinations to get power and to gain until they shall spread over the nation, behold, they shall be destroyed. The Lord has declared that before the second coming of Christ, it will be necessary to destroy the secret works of darkness in order to preserve the land of Zion, the Americas. The worldwide secret conspiracy which has risen up in our day to fulfill these prophecies is easily identified. The footnote for this is Ezra Taft Benson, General Conference Address, October 7th, 1961. For a discussion of the prophecy which quotes Joseph Smith dealing with the Constitution hanging by a thread, see Chapter 5 and the appendix of this book. So, like I said, we're going to be revisiting that. But I suspect that originally came from this one over here. Now, here's my position on this. Oh, dang it. There's just like, no, I can push through, we can do this. It's really amazing to me that we focus on communism as this global secret combination. And yes, there's a lot to that. But I don't think that's the only one. I admire capitalism, pure, true, honest, and most importantly, honest capitalism is probably one of the best systems to work in this fallen world, because the incentive is to serve people. You don't get money unless you serve them in some way, whether it's providing goods or services. The only problem is that when you get companies and corporations that become so huge that they have massive sway over governments and just entire systems that pull strings, whether that be mutual fund companies, whether that be the global leaders in economic forums, whether that be politicians being bought out or bribed or blackmailed, whether that be whatever it is. There's all sorts of corruption, high and low, where you have ruling people who decide certain things to line their pockets, to therefore rule in corruption to get gain, as he's saying. These are secret combinations. People who are willing to go out there and kill people just to keep their power. It's that kind of stuff that it does not have to be the Reds. I mean, that was the big thing during the 1960s, and understandably so. And it's still a problem, but culturally it seems to have weakened because they have integrated a little more when it comes to capitalist ideas. But the crux of the matter of not allowing for religion is a hugely big problem. And you will see that in these countries that adopt this socialism and communism, it is a culture of corruption, a place where you have to grease the palms of the people that you go and work with to get anything done. And it just destroys moral fiber. And in the same way, there is corruption in the United States. There is. It just comes at a different angle. It may not be imposed by the government, but it's still through people having incentives to do what is wrong to get gain and to fight against those who try and call them out on it. Just look at all the government spending we have here that goes to nowhere. Bridges to nowhere, daycares with no children, and plenty more And that's just the basic stuff you see in the headlines right now. We talk all the time about Medicare and Medicaid fraud and all this other stuff. It's not that we don't have it. We do. But it runs in circles that generally are outside our purview as general countrymen in the United States. We don't want to participate in that. And so for most people, we don't. But there's plenty of people who either are encouraged to come here, not legally, and participate in taking care of all these programs, whether that's welfare or business programs, and to just take this money, but not be accountable for it. They may be encouraged, and so it becomes this thing where it's like, hey, let's just keep bringing people in and keep committing this fraud and other things like that. And it's not right. There's plenty of people who want to do what's right, who that just doesn't enter into their mind at all. But then there's other groups that it's like, oh yeah, let's set up this thing, we'll have it be government spending. No one gets hurt because it's just the government printing money. It's not even the taxes, because frankly, taxes has been decoupled from government spending for so long that it frankly doesn't matter. It's stupid silly, and I could go on for that. So they talk about communism as the threat, and there's parts of that that's very true still. But to me, I see secret combinations just being corruption, period. Whatever form it is, whether that's governmental, institutional, corporate, personal, all of those, general corruption. And if it eventually becomes a culture, which means that a group of people are willing to continue the cycle of fraud and corruption, there is a secret combination. It's as simple as that. You know it's a really serious and evil secret combination when people start killing for it. All right, I am going to have to call it here. I'm sorry. I wanted to finish the chapter so badly, but I keep commenting on it. It's only 2 pages. Okay, I'm going to just try and cram through it and keep my mouth shut. Okay. As both the prophet and Elder Benson indicated above, this war is to come to a sudden and seemingly miraculous end through the instrumentality of the members of the church. President McKay, while speaking at a devotional assembly at Brigham Young University in May 1960, also alluded to the miraculous overthrow of communism. Russia developed with communism a new religious freedom. Quote. So this is President McKay speaking at a devotional in May 1960. Russia enveloped with communism, a new religious freedom must come. God will overrule it, for the people must hear the truth, and truth in simplicity. Truth there is much for the church to do in the coming century. Like I said, we've had missionaries in Russia. Ezra Taft Benson, in his recent conference address, quoted President McKay, saying, quote, "Men will be free. I have hoped for 20 years that the Russian system would break up. There is no freedom under it, and sooner or later the people will rise against it. They cannot oppose the fundamentals of civilization and of God. They cannot crush their people always. Men will be free." Unquote. The author has in his possession copies of 2 patriarchal blessings given by the patriarch in St. John's, Arizona, in which the war between Russia and the United States is prophesied. Because of their personal nature and because the evidence in this work is limited to the scriptures and the works of general authorities of the church, they are not quoted here. However, a brief summary of their message may not be improper and would serve to shed some light on the matter under consideration. They are in complete harmony with each other. Each term, the Third World War, they speak of Russia and her allies and clearly state that they will be defeated by the United States and her allies. The United States is to be attacked by a strong European power. The war will take place largely in the air and under the ocean, and both major powers will drop bombs on each other. Traitor after traitor will be detected and apprehended in the country, and the God of heaven will take over and bring the war to a speedy victory for America and her allies. Russia will never again be a great world power, and the United States will eventually rise to great heights among the nations of the world. So that is quotes from Patriarchal Blessings. So that's the sum up of it. That's interesting. Joseph Smith that's really interesting. Joseph Smith gave several prophetic warnings about the danger of attack from communist countries. In one prophecy, he warned of possible attack by the Chinese, who under communist rule. He stated that quote, "There is a land beyond the Rocky Mountains that will be invaded by the heathen Chinese unless great care and protection are given," unquote. That comes from the prophecy recorded by Edwin Rushton and Theodore Turley as having been made by Joseph Smith on May 6, 1843. For detailed discussion of this prophecy, see the appendix, and further references to this prophecy will be given as the prophecy recorded by Edwin Rushton and Theodore Turley. So, got more to look forward to. And again, there's a lot of people who envision scenarios like that, including me. Two other prophetic utterances attributed by Joseph Smith seem to shed further light on possible war with Russia. The first details with those who will be allied with that country. Oh, wait a minute. Whoa, I skipped a section. Ezra Taft mentioned Echo this morning in General Conference on October 9th, 1960, when he said that there's little doubt that the leaders of Red China view war as inevitable and wait only the propitious moment in which to strike. And so there was a re-emphasis of that. All right, so now two other prophetic utterances attributed to Joseph Smith seem to shed further light on a possible war with Russia. The first deals with those who will be allied against that country. Quote, "The Lord took of the best blood of the nations and planted them on the small islands now called England and Great Britain, and gave them great power in the nations for 1,000 years, and their power will continue with them, that they may keep the balance of power and keep Russia from uprising her power over all the world. England and France are now bitter enemies, but they will be allied together and will be united to keep Russia from conquering the world." Again, that's from Edward Rushton and Theodore Turley, who recorded the prophecy from Joseph Smith. Unquote. The other prophecy was made by the prophet to the father of President John Taylor. After foretelling the United States war with Mexico and also the war between the United States, the war between the states, Joseph commented that when the great bear lays her paw on the lion, the winding up scene is not far distant. Since the bear is a symbol for Russia and since the lion is a symbol for England, this seems to be a prophetic allusion to attack or persecution by Russia against England. It would seem to apply in the present context. 4 items of logic seem to establish the fall of communism during the period of preparatory wars, before the period of wars of complete destruction begins. First statements by various general authorities indicate that the Russia's collapse and missionaries will penetrate into that area and preach the gospel there. We've already seen that. President McKay's statement quoted above should be recalled in this context. A new religious freedom must come. God will overrule it, communism, for that a people must hear the truth, and the truth in simplicity. Truly, there is much for the church to do in the coming century. Second, intense religious persecution against the church in Russia is prophesied. Yep, there's that too. Yet in the era of wars, complete destruction of the church is to be ignored while its enemies fight among themselves, said Orson Pratt. Even in Russia, that place where they would almost put you to death if you brought a printed work of religious nature into the empire, in that country, where they will not suffer you to propagate the Bible unmolested, those whose religion is established by law has the gospel of Jesus Christ to be preached. Yet the church of the saints is to be established there, and after it is established, there they are to gather, together in multitudes, like other nations, to fight against it. Third, Melvin J. Ballard, in a conference address in April 1930, stated that the gospel would be carried to Russia sooner, and associated that work with God's overthrow of a despotic government there, which is another characteristic of the period of preparatory war. Quote, so this is Melvin J. Ballard, "I am sure that God is moving in Russia, much as we are disturbed over the tyranny and oppression that is waged against religion in that land today. It is not a new thing, for that has been the order for ages. But I can see God moving also in preparing the way for other events that are to come. The field that has gone to wild oats needs to be plowed up and harrowed and prepared for new seed. So in Russia, it may seem appalling to us, but it is God breaking up and destroying an older order of things. And the process will be to accomplish the accomplishment of God's purpose within a very short period of time, which normally may have taken generations, but that people will come back, for I bear witness that there are thousands of the blood of Israel in that land, and God preparing the way for them." See chapter 4, so there's more to come on that. But again, we've seen this. Just listen to Jonah Barnes when he talks about missionary conferences that he had in Russia, and how like the 10 tribes of Israel were there. Way cool. I'm wondering if this war with Ukraine is to help kind of overthrow the old order of Russia and give a brief time for the saints before the even stronger wars to come. Fourth, it will be seen in coming chapter that the fulfilling of the times of the Gentiles, the line of demarcation between the two eras of war, will commence at the outbreak of the internal war in the United States. Oh, sorry, that's where you see chapter 4. Sorry. In this internal war, mob rule will prevail, and the United States and federal government will completely collapse. Yeah. Along with its defensive forces, only the saints who gather to the mountains will be free from this struggle. The fulfillment of the prophecies cited pertaining to war with Russia must precede the Civil War in the United States. For after that internal war, there will be no United States government to be opposed by communism. Summary. Okay, so he's basically saying, look, this kind of fall of communist rule will need to happen so missionaries can go in there. We've had that happen. Now, is that going to happen more after this war with Ukraine is over? Maybe. Then there will be internal strife. We're already seeing the seeds of it being planted and stoked by the political parties, which is much to my chagrin. But this is the summary. This chapter has dealt with the following chronological events. 1. There is a period of preparatory wars, which will begin with the rebellion of South Carolina in 1861. This period of war has its purpose the overthrow of despotic governments to prohibit the preaching of the gospel in its progress, and now will continue for an unknown time until the time of Gentiles are fulfilled. 1a, the slaves are to rise against their masters. This seems to be the process of being fulfilled now. B, the United States will spend her strength and means warring in foreign lands. Other nations, which appear to be Russia and our allies, again, China, will attack her and war will be waged, and this war will end the United States with the United States emerging victorious after help is provided for the United States Army in a miraculous fashion by the elders of the church. This will be World War III. That is interesting. 1c, the gospel will be carried to Russia and other countries where the world has not yet penetrated. We've already seen that. D, more and more of the countries become receptive to the church's missionary efforts. Converts will be made within them. These converts will be instructed to remain in those countries, and they will be subjected to varying degrees of persecution because of their religious beliefs. And we are still, again, already seeing that. 2, there will be a period of terrible wars of destruction. A, times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. The Gentiles because of their wickedness, will have the missionaries taken from them. The time of fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles is the time when God's judgments of plagues, famine, pestilence, earthquakes, tidal waves, etc. begin to sweep the wicked off the earth with greatly increased violence. B, the converts and members of the church living in other countries will be called out and instructed to come to Zion in America when the times of Gentiles are fulfilled. C, an internal war will rage within the United States, which will bring about the collapse of national and state government. D, a world war of wars of terrible destruction will be fought, which will lay waste the Gentile world. The saints will, for the most part, escape the impact of this war. This war will apparently be World War IV? The items mentioned in the second division of the summary above will be discussed in detail in coming chapters. Okay, all right. So yes, a longer video, I hope you don't mind, but next is going to be missionary work among the Gentiles. But this war one, this is the one a lot of people love to focus on because, hey, it's grandiose, it's big, etc. So they think, at least according to this, that there's going to be a Third World War and a fourth one. And if that's the case, that'll be interesting. I would love to see where this goes, because to me it seems like we've already got a lot of this going on. We've already had the gospel preached in Russia, yet President Nelson, before his passing, said that they would build a temple in Russia, but they didn't have any plans for it. He just said, we will build one. We'll have to figure it out, but it'll come. And like I said, I'm wondering if all this preparatory posturing is for some greater calamity, because what I could see is that all these preparatory skirmishes are setups and build-ups for the big one. I don't think there has to be a third and a fourth World War. To me, I think that we have all these preparatory things that are going on. And then we will have these... Well, here's how I could see things playing out. Again, I'm not going off. This is just my own headcanon right now. So do not take it as anything definitive. Imagine if China decided, hey, let's take over Taiwan, so we fight a whole lot over there, or that Russia finally says, hey, we're tired of all this meddling, I'm going to go after Europe, and then England and France and the NATO nations over there have to step in to stop Russia from continuing on beyond Ukraine. And then we're also expending a lot of time and effort in the Middle East, or then we start spreading ourselves out in South America if we need to, just to kind of stop the spread of communist influence from China and Russia and Iran and Iraq and all these other places. So we spend a lot of our time, effort, and forces over there. Politically, things continue to get worse here internally in the United States. It keeps getting divided more and more between people who are socialist and communist. Just look at Mem Domney in New York, and people who are like, no, we really seriously need to stop and go back to defending our country as a whole, like Trump is working on. He's not perfect by any means at trying to do that. But at least he's pushing for it. And so there's a group that pushes for that. So you have continued division that way, where blue cities become more blue and more belligerent, and the red rural areas become more red and more pig-headed on their own way. And so we have this internal strife as well as the external strife spreading itself abroad, followed by which then despite all these confrontations, there's a period of time where I'm thinking either the gospel has been spread to Russia, or it will allow for the gospel to spread to Russia, that we'll have a brief period of time for 5 to 10 years, something like that, where the gospel is spread to all these places that we normally didn't have access, whether that's China and Russia, or whether that's these other Islamic countries or whatever else. And then it becomes really apparent that the United States just doesn't have the gumption anymore because of the internal strife and problems, and because of the malfunction, the malfunction and misfiring of what's going on. Then comes the time that these other great nations are like, now is the time to strike, and they do. And then we get all sorts of destruction where everyone's fighting against everyone. The saints are coalesced together, and then they, just as America's about to fall, they come in and help save the day. That hang by the thread and come back and reestablish what the government should have been. Limited, very, very limited in specifically just defending the nation as a whole, and then leaving to us, the people, what we should be doing, our responsibilities, and not taking over the responsibilities. Anyway, there you go. It could be like that. Who knows? I will not... There's, this is where everyone becomes this, I wonder if it could be this way. I wonder if it could be this way. Again, from the time that I was a kid, growing up in the 90s to now, so much has happened that I didn't even pay attention to. Like I said, the idea of people being in Russia for missions, it was kind of bandied about and jokingly said. And then it was like, oh, no, wait, yeah, maybe we could. And then it actually happens, and I didn't even notice. And the demographic change all over the world because of different just immigration policies all over Europe and England and the United States has changed things dramatically. And how people view the nation and try and fight ideologically has changed dramatically to being so polemic and just polarizing. It's desperately changed from when we were mostly united under kind of the banner of the United States from the 1960s until now. And so much has happened since the time of my parents' generation. And, even then they were fighting their own fights. And now we're fighting our own fights, and stuff has definitely changed since then. Everyone was still worried about Russia. And right now I'm looking at Russia and going, well, maybe they're not as big a deal as we thought, since they're spending all their time and youth grinding each other up on the Ukrainian border, and which is just stupid. At the same time, they might be coalescing their forces, and this might be like, hey, let's get rid of this old stuff here, which is just a terrible way to do it, trying to gain a foothold for what they want. We'll see how this all shakes out. In some ways, I hope it ends. You always want it to happen sooner rather than later, because, this has been going for some time. But we'll see. Anyways, more than anything, over all this stuff, we started out with a bang talking about the wars and rumors of wars. But truly, all you have to do is remember Doctrine and Covenants, section 45, around verse 60, and just pray to God. Ask him. He's the one who knows all things about the guidance in your life. Because if you look at it, a lot of this stuff just pertains to these big national things going on. And so, unless you're in that sphere, it may not affect you as much. That's just kind of a fact of life, that not everyone is a warrior on the front lines. And so you might find a lot of peace in the fact that, it will affect you differently. Let me put it that way. And so you should ask God for you and your life what that will mean for you, because then there are other people who are warriors on the front line, and for them this has greater meaning and have greater immediate impact for them. But it's the guidance of revelation that will keep you where you need to be. And with that, I hope the Spirit of God is with you to give you comfort and direction. You have a great day.